Officer Kyle Jensen had been with the Baltimore Police Department for exactly 11 months when he walked into a situation that would destroy his career before it truly began and cost the city $7.2 million. He was 24 years old, fresh out of the academy, young enough to claim inexperience, but old enough to understand basic procedure, but apparently convinced that his instincts about who belonged where were more reliable than physical evidence held in his hands. One Thursday afternoon in a busy downtown Baltimore coffee shop, he received a call from an anxious barista about a suspicious person who'd been standing near the pickup counter too long. The suspicious person was Marcus Reed, a 52-year-old FBI director with 28 years of federal law enforcement experience, waiting for a cappuccino he'd ordered 4 minutes earlier. What Jensen did next, ignoring Reed's receipt, dismissing his credentials as counterfeit, and arresting him in front of 30 customers and 3 body cameras, would become proof of how racial profiling and rookie arrogance combine into career-ending catastrophe. But this story isn't just about one officer's spectacular failure of judgment. It's about a training system that sends 24-year-old officers onto the street with badges and guns, but not the wisdom to recognize their own bias. It's about a culture that taught Jensen to see a black man standing calmly in a coffee shop and immediately assume criminal behavior. And it's about what happens when that assumption collides with someone who has the authority, resources, and federal backing to fight back. A black man in his early 50s, Marcus Reed, was standing at the mobile order pickup counter at Grind and Brew Coffee on Pratt Street, checking his phone while waiting for his name to be called. His FBI credentials were in the inner pocket of his navy suit jacket. His service weapon was secured at his hip, concealed beneath the jacket. No crime, no disturbance, no violation. Just a federal law enforcement director waiting for coffee on his lunch break. But Officer Jensen saw him through a lens so clouded by assumptions that he couldn't imagine a black man in business attire as anything other than a threat. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these expose the patterns that need fixing, and your support helps us demand accountability. Now, let's talk about the coffee shop, where everything went wrong. Grind and Brew Coffee sits on the corner of Pratt Street and Light Street in downtown Baltimore, 2 blocks from the Inner Harbor and 3 blocks from the federal courthouse. It's a spacious, modern cafe that opened in 2019 with exposed ductwork, polished concrete floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows that flood the space with natural light. The counter runs along the back wall, with a separate mobile order pickup station to the left. High-top tables line the windows. Low leather chairs cluster around coffee tables in the center. The clientele is predictable. Lawyers between court appearances, financial advisors meeting clients, tech workers on laptop marathons, federal employees grabbing afternoon caffeine. It was 1:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October. The lunch rush had passed, but the afternoon crowd had arrived. 28 customers occupied tables or stood waiting for orders. The espresso machine hissed rhythmically. Indie folk played softly through ceiling speakers. Sunlight streamed through the west-facing windows, casting long rectangles across the concrete floor. The temperature outside was 68 degrees, that perfect fall afternoon, where people linger over coffee and don't rush back to their offices. Behind the counter, 3 baristas worked efficiently, one on the espresso machine, one handling the register, one assembling food orders. The mobile order pickup counter had 4 drinks waiting, names written in black marker on white cups. Every few minutes, someone would walk up, grab their order, and leave. Standard coffee shop rhythm. Nothing unusual, nothing tense. The only problem was brewing in the mind of 19-year-old barista Trevor Mills, who'd been working at Grind and Brew for 7 months. Mills had noticed a black man in a suit standing near the pickup counter for what seemed like too long. The man wasn't causing trouble. He wasn't bothering anyone. He was just standing there, occasionally glancing at his phone, occasionally looking at the counter. But in Mills's mind, something felt off. The man didn't look like the usual customers. He seemed too focused, too alert. Mills had watched enough true crime documentaries to convince himself he could spot suspicious behavior. And this, he decided, was suspicious behavior. After watching for 3 more minutes, Mills pulled his phone from his apron and stepped into the back room. He dialed 911. Marcus Anthony Reed had been with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 28 years. 28 years that had taken him from entry-level special agent to one of the Bureau's most respected leaders. He'd spent 9 years in organized crime, dismantling drug trafficking networks that stretched from Baltimore to Miami. He'd spent 7 years in counterterrorism, working cases that required navigating diplomatic relationships with foreign intelligence agencies. He'd spent 6 years in violent crimes, supervising teams that tracked serial offenders across state lines. For the past 6 years, he'd served as the director of the FBI's criminal division, overseeing 3,200 agents and managing investigations that shaped federal law enforcement policy. He'd testified before Congress 17 times. He'd briefed 3 presidents. He'd coordinated with the Department of Justice, the CIA, the Secret Service, and Interpol. His work had resulted in 247 federal indictments, 189 convictions, and the disruption of criminal enterprises operating in 14 countries. His supervisors called him strategic. His colleagues called him the director who never forgot he'd been a field agent. His agents called him fair but demanding, the kind of leader who expected excellence because he'd demonstrated it first. Reed had earned his law degree from Georgetown while working as a Baltimore police officer, then completed his master's in criminal justice from John Jay College of Criminal Justice. He'd clerked for a federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. He'd published research on transnational organized crime that became required reading at the FBI Academy. He'd received the Attorney General's Award for Distinguished Service in 2018, the FBI Director's Award for Excellence in 2015, and the Presidential Rank Award in 2021. His personnel file was 400 pages of achievements, commendations, and cases that had changed federal law enforcement. At 52 years old, Marcus Reed was exactly where decades of discipline had positioned him, leading one of the most critical divisions in federal law enforcement. He was married to Dr. Simone Reed, a cardiothoracic surgeon at Johns Hopkins Hospital. They had 2 children, a daughter finishing her residency in pediatrics, and a son in his 2nd year at Harvard Law School. Reed lived in a modest townhouse in Federal Hill, drove a 2019 Honda Accord, and spent his weekends coaching youth basketball and volunteering with a mentorship program for at-risk teenagers in West Baltimore. He was exactly the kind of success story that should be celebrated. A black man from East Baltimore who'd risen through merit, intelligence, and relentless work ethic to lead thousands of federal agents. That Thursday afternoon, Reed had been at the federal courthouse 3 blocks away, attending a hearing for a racketeering case his division had been building for 14 months. The hearing ended at 1:30 p.m. His next meeting, a video conference with the Deputy Attorney General, was scheduled for 2:15 p.m. back at his office. He had 45 minutes, just enough time for coffee and a brief review of his notes. He'd walked into Grind and Brew at 1:44 p.m., placed a mobile order on his phone while standing near the entrance. 1 cappuccino, extra shot, no sugar. The app confirmed his order at 1:45 p.m. and estimated a 4-minute wait. He moved to the pickup counter and stood to the side, checking emails on his phone while the baristas prepared drinks. He wore a navy blue suit, crisp white shirt, and burgundy tie, standard professional attire for someone attending federal court. His FBI credentials, a black leather bifold case containing his badge and identification card, were in his jacket's inner left pocket. His service weapon, a Glock 19, was secured in a hip holster concealed beneath his jacket. He carried it by policy, even though he rarely needed it. Directors didn't typically conduct arrests or engage in tactical operations, but he was still a sworn federal agent, and policy required him to be armed while on duty. He looked like what he was, a senior federal law enforcement official between meetings. He'd done nothing to attract attention. He'd spoken to no one except the barista who'd greeted him when he entered. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't made demands. He hadn't bothered a single person. His order was called at 1:47 p.m. Marcus! A barista set a white cup with his name, written in black marker on the pickup counter. Reed pocketed his phone and stepped forward to grab it. And that's when Officer Kyle Jensen walked through the front door. Kyle Jensen was 24 years old. He'd been a sworn officer with the Baltimore Police Department for 11 months, having graduated from the police academy the previous November, with high marks in tactical training and low marks in community relations. He was eager, ambitious, and convinced that his ability to spot criminals was instinctive. His training officer had noted in evaluation reports that Jensen was confident but needs to improve his ability to assess situations before acting, and shows enthusiasm for enforcement but requires more experience in de-escalation. But those notes were buried in his personnel file. Jensen was young, fit, and driven. He wanted to prove himself. He wanted arrests. He wanted to be seen as someone who took action while others hesitated. And in his mind, that meant trusting his gut about who looked suspicious. In 11 months on patrol, Jensen had already compiled a troubling record. 7 citizen complaints. 7. In less than a year. 3 complaints involved stops of black motorists in predominantly white neighborhoods for minor traffic violations that Jensen escalated into searches. 1 motorist, a doctor returning from a hospital shift, was detained for 40 minutes while Jensen searched his vehicle for drugs based on what Jensen described as nervous behavior. No drugs were found. The complaint was sustained, resulting in a written reprimand and a 2-hour de-escalation workshop that Jensen attended, but later described to colleagues as pointless political correctness. 2 complaints involved pedestrian stops of young black men in the Inner Harbor area. Jensen had demanded identification, questioned where they were going, and suggested they were loitering even though they were walking on public sidewalks. Both complaints were closed as unfounded, despite witness statements supporting the complainant's accounts. 1 complaint involved Jensen ordering a Hispanic family to leave a public park 30 minutes before closing time because, in Jensen's words, they didn't seem like they belonged there. The family had a valid permit for a birthday party. The complaint was sustained. Jensen received a verbal counseling session. The 7th complaint came from a black woman Jensen had followed through a grocery store for 15 minutes before confronting her in the parking lot, accusing her of shoplifting. She had receipts for everything in her bags. The store confirmed she'd paid. Jensen claimed he'd received a tip from store security. Store security had called no one. The complaint was pending review. 7 complaints in 11 months. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. But somehow Jensen remained on patrol. His supervisors noted concerns, but took no meaningful action beyond verbal counseling and brief retraining sessions. The union protected him. His peers defended him. And Jensen himself saw no problem. In his mind, he was doing his job. He was being proactive. He was stopping crime before it happened. When the call came in about grind and brew coffee at 1:46 p.m., suspicious person loitering near the counter, making staff uncomfortable, Jensen was 2 blocks away, finishing a report from a minor fender bender. He marked himself en route immediately. In his mind, the narrative was already forming. Downtown coffee shop, suspicious person, staff concerned, probably someone homeless, probably panhandling, probably refusing to leave. Easy enforcement, quick resolution, another arrest to add to his record. He arrived at 1:47 p.m., parking his patrol car directly in front of the entrance with lights flashing, unnecessarily dramatic for a non-emergency call, but Jensen wanted presence. He wanted people to know police had arrived. He walked through the front door, his right hand resting instinctively near his service weapon. His eyes scanned the shop quickly. Tables full of white professionals, a few Asian students with laptops, one older white couple sharing a pastry. His gaze swept past all of them and locked immediately onto Marcus Reed, a black man in a suit, standing at the pickup counter, reaching for a coffee cup. In Jensen's mind, that had to be the problem. The man was too still, too focused, too alert. The suit seemed too nice. The posture seemed too confident. Something about the picture didn't fit, and Jensen had learned to trust those instincts. He walked directly toward Reed, his approach purposeful and confrontational. Reed picked up his cappuccino and turned toward the exit. He took 2 steps before he noticed the officer walking toward him with a hand near his weapon, and an expression that Reed had seen 1,000 times in his career. Someone who'd already decided guilt before asking a single question. Do you think rookie officers with multiple sustained complaints should remain on patrol without additional oversight? Drop your answer below. Marcus Reed was 3 steps from the door, cappuccino in hand, when Officer Jensen stepped directly into his path. "Sir, I need you to step outside." Reed stopped, confused. He glanced at the badge, then at Jensen's face. The officer was young, mid-20s at most, with a clean-shaven face and an expression that combined authority with something else Reed recognized immediately: nervous aggression. "I'm sorry. Is there a problem?" "Outside. Now." Reed looked around. 28 people in the coffee shop. Every single one of them was staring. Several had phones out. This was already being documented, which meant Reed needed to handle this carefully. "Officer, I'm just leaving. I picked up my coffee and I'm headed back to work. The staff says you've been loitering. You need to leave the premises." "Loitering?" Reed almost laughed. "I ordered 4 minutes ago. I was waiting for my order. I just picked it up." Jensen's jaw tightened. "You've been standing at that counter making people uncomfortable." This is where assumptions become accusations. Officer Jensen had walked into a coffee shop and immediately fixated on the one black man in professional attire, not the white man working on his laptop for 90 minutes on a single coffee purchase, not the group of students who'd been occupying a 6-person table with 2 drinks between them. A black man standing calmly, waiting for his name to be called. Committed no crime, but triggered in Jensen's mind an entire narrative of suspicion. Reed felt his professional composure being tested. He'd been a federal agent for 28 years. He'd interrogated cartel bosses, terrorism suspects, and organized crime figures. He'd been in tactical situations that required split-second decisions under life-threatening pressure. And now, a rookie cop with 11 months of experience was accusing him of loitering in a coffee shop where he was a paying customer. "Officer, I'm not loitering. I'm a customer. I ordered, I paid, I waited, I received my order, and now I'm leaving. Do you have ID? Proof you paid?" Reed reached into his jacket pocket slowly, deliberately slowly, because he knew exactly how young officers with nervous trigger fingers could misinterpret sudden movements. He pulled out his phone, opened the mobile order app, and showed the screen to Jensen. "Here. Mobile order, placed at 1:45 p.m. Paid with my credit card. Receipt right here." Jensen glanced at the phone. His expression didn't soften. Anyone can fake a screenshot. Reed blinked. The absurdity was almost overwhelming. Fake a screenshot? Of a coffee order? "Officer, this is a legitimate receipt from a legitimate transaction 3 minutes ago. You've been standing there too long. You're making customers uncomfortable." Reed looked around again. "Making customers uncomfortable? I haven't spoken to anyone. I haven't approached anyone. I was standing quietly waiting for my coffee. Are you going to leave, or do I need to remove you?" The coffee shop had gone silent. The espresso machine had stopped hissing. Conversations had died. Everyone was watching. Reed made a decision. He could walk away, leave and let this young officer remain ignorant of his mistake, or he could do what his position required: identify himself properly, and give Jensen one chance to recognize the catastrophic error he was making. "Officer, I understand you're responding to a call, but I'm Marcus Reed. I'm the director of the FBI's Criminal Division. I'm a federal law enforcement officer. I'm also a paying customer who's committed no crime and violated no policy. I'm asking you to verify who I am before this goes any further." Jensen's eyes narrowed. Reed knew that look. It wasn't recognition. It wasn't concern. It was skepticism wrapped in contempt. "I don't care if you're the president. Put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for trespassing and disorderly conduct." Reed felt his stomach drop. He'd given Jensen an out. He'd identified himself clearly. He'd stated his position. And Jensen had dismissed it entirely. "Officer, I'm going to reach into my jacket and show you my credentials. I'm doing this slowly. My hand is going into my left inner pocket. Don't move. I'm reaching for my FBI credentials. That's all." Reed moved deliberately, his hand sliding into his jacket, fingers closing around the leather bifold case. He pulled it out and opened it. The gold FBI badge on one side, the identification card with his photo, name, title, and badge number on the other. He held it up at eye level, giving Jensen a clear view. "Here, FBI credentials. Special Agent Marcus Anthony Reed." Director, Criminal Division, badge number 1847. My office is 4 blocks from here. You can verify this with one phone call. Jensen took the credentials and examined them. Reed watched his face, looking for recognition, for doubt, for any flicker of understanding that he'd just arrested a federal director. Nothing. Anyone can buy fake badges online. Reed's professional control cracked slightly. Anyone can buy fake credentials? Officer, those are federal law enforcement credentials. They have anti-counterfeiting measures, holograms, raised seals, the FBI seal watermark. You can feel the embossing. These are not fake. I'm taking you into custody. Hands behind your back. This is where bias becomes impenetrable. Officer Jensen had formed his conclusion the moment he walked through the door and saw Marcus Reed. Every piece of evidence after that moment, the receipt, the credentials, the calm professionalism, the logical explanations, was filtered through that initial assumption. He wasn't looking at an FBI director. He was looking at someone trying to avoid arrest. The credentials had to be fake. The suit had to be a costume. The calm demeanor had to be an act. His bias was so complete, it couldn't process contradictory information. Reed knew he had a choice: resist and risk violence. And a rookie officer with 7 complaints in 11 months might very well escalate to force. Or comply, document everything, and let this catastrophic mistake play out with witnesses and cameras capturing every moment. He chose documentation. I'm complying under protest. I am Director Marcus Reed, Federal Bureau of Investigation, Criminal Division. This officer is arresting me for ordering coffee while black. Everyone here is witnessing this. I'm asking you to record it. Several people already were. Phones were up. A woman near the window angled her camera toward them. A man at the counter held his phone at shoulder height, recording. The 3 baristas stood frozen behind the counter, watching. Reed turned slowly, setting his cappuccino on a nearby table. He placed his hands behind his back. Jensen grabbed his wrist roughly, yanking it upward. Don't. I'm complying. There's no need for force. Jensen ignored him. He pulled Reed's arms back and snapped handcuffs on. Tight. Deliberately tight. Reed winced but said nothing. You're under arrest for trespassing, disorderly conduct, and resisting an officer. I didn't resist. Everyone in this shop saw me comply voluntarily. Should officers be required to verify federal credentials before making arrests? Let me know what you think. Jensen marched Reed toward the door. As they passed the counter, one of the baristas finally spoke up, his voice shaking. Officer, he's telling the truth. He ordered 4 minutes ago. He just picked up his coffee. He didn't do anything wrong. Jensen didn't respond. He pushed the door open and led Reed outside, past the front windows where customers were now standing. Phones pressed to the glass, recording everything. Sergeant Patricia Dalton arrived 7 minutes after Jensen radioed that he'd made an arrest at Grind and Brew Coffee. Dalton was a 19-year veteran who'd supervised patrol officers for 11 years and had personally reviewed 3 of Jensen's citizen complaints. She'd recommended additional training after complaint number 4. Her recommendation had been noted but not acted upon. When her radio crackled with Jensen's voice announcing a trespassing arrest, something in his tone made her decide to respond personally. She pulled up behind Jensen's patrol car at 1:54 p.m. Jensen was standing on the sidewalk with a black man in handcuffs, a black man wearing a suit that probably cost more than Jensen's monthly paycheck, standing with the rigid posture of someone deeply familiar with how to carry himself under duress. Dalton's instincts flared immediately. Wrong. This felt wrong. Jensen, what do you have? Trespassing and disorderly conduct at the coffee shop. Subject was loitering, refused to leave when asked, became confrontational when I tried to remove him. Dalton turned to Reed. Sir, what's your name? Marcus Reed. I'm the director of the FBI's Criminal Division. I ordered coffee 4 minutes before this officer arrived, waited for my order, picked it up, and was walking toward the exit when I was arrested. Dalton's stomach dropped. FBI director? Yes. My credentials are in the officer's possession. He examined them and called them fake. They're not. You can verify with one phone call to the FBI field office, which is 4 blocks away. Dalton turned to Jensen. You have his credentials? Jensen pulled the leather case from his pocket, handing it over reluctantly. He said he's FBI. Could be fake. Dalton opened the credentials and studied them carefully. Gold FBI badge, raised seal, hologram on the ID card, official photograph. Title clearly stated, Director, Criminal Division, badge, number 1847. She pulled her phone and dialed the Baltimore FBI field office. The call was answered in 3 rings. This is Sergeant Dalton, Baltimore Police. I need to verify credentials for someone claiming to be Marcus Reed. Badge number 1847, 30 seconds of hold music. Then, Director Reed is active duty, Criminal Division. Is there a problem? Dalton's face went pale. She hung up and turned to Jensen with something cold and dangerous in her expression. These credentials are legitimate. You just arrested an FBI director for ordering coffee. Jensen's face flickered with the first hint of doubt. I was responding to a call. The barista said, I don't care what the barista said. Did you verify his receipt? Did you confirm he was actually loitering? Did you attempt to de-escalate before arresting him? Silence. Badge and service weapon. Administrative leave effective immediately. Jensen's face went from doubt to panic. Sergeant, You arrested a federal law enforcement director after he showed you his credentials, after he offered to verify his identity, and after he told you exactly what would happen if you proceeded. Give me your badge and weapon. Now. Jensen's hands shook as he removed his badge from his uniform and his service weapon from its holster. For the first time, he seemed to understand what he'd done. Dalton turned to Reed. Director Reed, on behalf of the Baltimore Police Department, this arrest was wrong. I'm removing these handcuffs immediately, and I assure you this will be investigated fully. Reed's voice was measured but edged with steel. Sergeant, I appreciate the apology, but this isn't over. This officer ignored clear evidence, dismissed federal credentials, and arrested me in front of 36 witnesses because I'm black. That's not a training issue. That's a civil rights violation. I understand, sir. I'll be filing a formal complaint with your department, the FBI Office of Professional Responsibility, and my attorney. Every moment of this is documented by multiple witnesses. Yes, sir. Should officers with 7 complaints in 11 months be placed on administrative duty pending review? Drop your answer. Within 90 minutes, the videos had exploded across every platform. Multiple angles. Clear audio. FBI Director Marcus Reed showing his credentials. Officer Jensen calling them fake. Reed being handcuffed. Reed being led out of the coffee shop like a criminal. FBI Director arrested for ordering coffee, while black rookie cop arrests his boss's boss. Didn't recognize FBI Director, black FBI Director handcuffed at Baltimore coffee shop. After showing badge federal law enforcement director detained for loitering at Starbucks-style cafe. The outrage was immediate and volcanic. The FBI issued a statement within 2 hours. Director Marcus Reed was unlawfully detained by Baltimore police while off duty. The FBI takes this incident extremely seriously and is coordinating with Baltimore PD and the Department of Justice to ensure full accountability. The NAACP released a statement calling the arrest proof that even a federal badge isn't enough to protect black professionals from racial profiling. Civil rights organizations demanded immediate termination of Officer Jensen and a comprehensive review of Baltimore PD's training and complaint investigation procedures. Baltimore's mayor held a press conference at 5 p.m., visibly shaken. This incident is unacceptable. The officer has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We are cooperating with federal authorities. Officer Kyle Jensen's life imploded in hours. Social media identified him within 90 minutes. His name trended nationally. His complaint history, 7 complaints in 11 months, was published by investigative journalists. Screenshots of his social media posts, some containing thinly veiled racial language and Blue Lives Matter rhetoric, circulated widely. His union issued a brief statement defending his actions as based on the information available at the time. The statement was ratioed into oblivion within minutes. Even his fellow officers distanced themselves. Trevor Mills, the 19-year-old barista who'd called 911, gave a tearful statement to local media. I thought he was acting suspicious. I didn't know he was FBI. I just thought he'd been standing there too long. I'm sorry. Mills was fired within 48 hours. Grind and Brew Coffee issued a public apology, announced new employee training on racial bias, and donated $50,000 to civil rights organizations. But the damage was done. The video showed everything: a black professional, dressed for court, waiting patiently for his coffee, arrested because a teenage barista couldn't imagine he belonged there. Marcus Reed retained counsel within 24 hours. Not just any attorney, Benjamin Sharp, one of the country's leading civil rights litigators, whose firm had won $280 million in police misconduct cases over the past decade. The lawsuit was filed 11 days after the arrest. It named Officer Kyle Jensen, Sergeant Patricia Dalton for supervisory failure. Despite prior knowledge of Jensen's complaint history, the Baltimore Police Department, the City of Baltimore, and Trevor Mills personally. The claims were comprehensive and devastating. Unlawful arrest without probable cause. Reed committed no crime and violated no policy. False imprisonment and deprivation of liberty. Reed was detained and handcuffed despite presenting legitimate credentials. Violation of federal civil rights under 42 U.S.C. Par of 1983, racial profiling and discriminatory policing, excessive use of force, unnecessarily tight handcuffs and rough handling despite full compliance, intentional infliction of emotional distress, public humiliation and arrest of a respected federal official, negligent supervision and failure to train. Baltimore PD allowed Jensen to remain on patrol, despite 7 complaints in 11 months. Failure to implement early intervention systems. No meaningful oversight despite clear pattern of discriminatory policing. The complaint included Officer Jensen's complete disciplinary record. 7 complaints, 5 involving racial profiling, 2 sustained, none resulting in meaningful consequences. All documented, all ignored, all allowed to continue, until Jensen arrested someone with the authority and resources to fight back. The city's attorneys reviewed the case for 3 weeks. Their conclusion was unambiguous, indefensible. The evidence was overwhelming. Federal credentials examined and dismissed as fake, receipts showing legitimate purchase ignored, multiple witnesses confirming Reed's account, body camera footage showing everything, FBI director with impeccable reputation and 28-year career, rookie officer with 7 complaints in 11 months, department that ignored documented pattern of racial profiling. There was no viable defense, no reasonable explanation, no way to argue this was anything other than racial profiling. The city settled 9 months later. The terms were made public at Reed's insistence. $7.2 million paid to director Marcus Reed. Additional $400,000 paid into a fund for civil rights training for all Baltimore officers. Mandatory implementation of early intervention system. Flagging officers after 3 complaints. Requirement that all federal credentials be verified before arrest in non-emergency situations. Annual racial bias training conducted by external civil rights organizations. Public acknowledgement by the city that Reed's arrest was unconstitutional and motivated by racial bias. Officer Kyle Jensen was terminated 4 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was released publicly at Reed's request. Officer Jensen arrested a federal law enforcement director without probable cause, refused to verify legitimate federal credentials, engaged in clear racial profiling, and demonstrated a pattern of discriminatory policing documented across 7 citizen complaints in 11 months. Despite multiple interventions including written reprimands and mandatory training, Officer Jensen continued to demonstrate behavior incompatible with constitutional policing. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Jensen's name was entered into the National Decertification Index. His law enforcement career ended at 24 years old, 11 months after it began. Should cities face automatic DOJ investigations after settlements exceeding $5 million for racial profiling? Let me know in the comments. Marcus Reed testified before the Baltimore City Council 6 months after his arrest. The hearing room was packed with media, civil rights advocates, community members, and police officials. Reed's testimony lasted 18 minutes. Every word was deliberate, measured, and devastating. I'm the director of the FBI's Criminal Division. I have 28 years of federal law enforcement experience. I've led investigations involving organized crime, terrorism, corruption, and violent offenses. I've supervised thousands of agents. I've testified before Congress. I've briefed presidents. He paused, letting the weight of his credentials settle. On October 12th, I walked into a coffee shop 4 blocks from my office. I placed a mobile order on my phone, paid with my credit card, and waited 4 minutes for my name to be called. When I picked up my coffee and turned to leave, I was confronted by Officer Kyle Jensen, who accused me of loitering and making people uncomfortable. I showed him my receipt. He called it fake. I identified myself as an FBI director and offered to verify my identity. He dismissed my statement. I showed him my federal law enforcement credentials that took 28 years to earn. He examined them and called them counterfeit. Reed's voice hardened slightly. I was arrested in front of 30 witnesses, handcuffed with unnecessary force, and led out of that coffee shop like a criminal. Why? Because I'm black. That's it. That's the entire explanation. A teenage barista saw a black man waiting for coffee and assumed I didn't belong. Officer Jensen saw a black man in a suit and assumed I was lying about my credentials. Another pause. Officer Jensen had compiled 7 complaints in 11 months. 7. 5 of them involved allegations of racial profiling. 2 had been sustained. Your department knew about them, your supervisors reviewed them, and you did nothing meaningful to address the pattern. You sent him back onto the street with a badge and a gun, and the authority to arrest people. Reed looked directly at the council members. 7 complaints in 11 months. That's not bad luck. That's not misunderstanding. That's a pattern. A pattern your department ignored until Jensen arrested someone with the resources and authority to fight back. He leaned forward slightly. The city paid $7.2 million. That's accountability. Officer Jensen was fired. That's consequences. But money doesn't erase the humiliation of being handcuffed in public. Termination doesn't restore the dignity of being treated like a criminal while waiting for coffee. And neither addresses the fundamental question. If this can happen to me, an FBI director with 28 years of service, with credentials, with witnesses, with cameras recording, what happens to everyone else? His voice dropped, but every word carried. What happens to the black teenager stopped for walking in his own neighborhood? What happens to the black woman questioned for sitting in her own car? What happens to the black professional followed through a store because someone assumed they were shoplifting? They don't have FBI badges. They don't have attorneys on speed dial. They don't have the resources to fight back. And your department counts on that. The room was absolutely silent. This wasn't just about one rookie cop making one catastrophic mistake. This was about a system that put Kyle Jensen on the street with 7 complaints in 11 months and never asked the obvious question. Should he still be wearing a badge? Jensen's record told the story his supervisors chose to ignore. 7 complaints, 5 involving racial profiling, 2 sustained with written reprimands. What happened after those reprimands? 4-hour workshops on de-escalation and community relations. Workshops that Jensen attended, signed off on, and apparently learned nothing from, because the complaints kept coming. Complaint 4, 5, 6, 7. Each one involving the same pattern, the same assumptions, the same demographic. The Baltimore Police Department treated each complaint in isolation, never connecting them. Never asking whether 7 complaints in 11 months indicated someone who shouldn't be patrolling public streets. They gave him verbal counseling. They sent him to brief training sessions. They noted concerns in his file, but they never removed him from patrol. They never placed him on administrative duty. They never implemented meaningful oversight. They just kept sending him back out with a badge and a gun and the authority to arrest people based on his deeply flawed judgment. And so Kyle Jensen walked into Grind and Brew Coffee with 7 complaints already documented, saw Marcus Reed, and made the same assumption he'd made 7 times before. Black person in a space where he assumed black people don't belong must be a problem. This is how systemic racism functions in American policing. It's not always violent. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, procedural, bureaucratic. It's a complaint system that documents patterns but never acts on them. It's a training system that checks boxes but doesn't change behavior. It's a supervisory system that notes concerns but doesn't intervene. It's a culture that protects officers even when the evidence shows they're causing harm. Officer Jensen's career is over. That's justice. The city paid $7.2 million. That's accountability. The Baltimore Police Department implemented new early intervention protocols. That's reform. But money and terminations and policy changes don't undo the trauma of being arrested for ordering coffee. They don't restore the dignity of being handcuffed in front of colleagues and strangers. They don't erase the message that even an FBI director's badge isn't enough protection when bias decides you don't belong. The real question is, what changes now? Do police departments finally remove officers after 3 complaints instead of waiting for 7? Or 11? Or 20? Do cities finally implement real-time pattern analysis that flags officers before their 7th victim instead of after? Do we finally acknowledge that mandatory training workshops are worthless if there's no accountability when officers ignore what they learned? Do we finally accept that a 24-year-old with 11 months of experience and 7 complaints is not qualified to make arrest decisions in public spaces? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Jensen on patrol, despite clear warning signs, if we don't address the culture that protects officers with documented patterns of discrimination, then we're just waiting for the next Kyle Jensen, the next Marcus Reed, the next viral video showing exactly what we already know. For some officers, no credential is enough when their bias has already convicted you. Comment if you believe this should be federal law. Officers with 3 sustained complaints for racial profiling within 24 months face automatic decertification and cannot serve in law enforcement anywhere in the United States. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with exposure and change requires pressure, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing departments that protect officers over communities. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for FBI directors, coffee drinkers, and ordinary people who deserve to exist in public spaces without being criminalized for their skin color. This isn't just about one rookie cop or one federal director. It's about all of us and the world we choose to accept or refuse to tolerate any longer.